I'm going to gently, politely call you to order and welcome you very warmly to Café Theo, particularly if you might be here for the first time, as I know you are. If you haven't met me before, I'm Mary Gregory. I am the Bishop of Reading. I've been here, I think, 3 months. I've stopped counting days now, and I've started counting months, which I hope is a good sign. And one of the first things I did as Bishop of Reading, I came here and Mark interviewed me about my life story, and he then mentioned that we were lucky enough to have Claire coming to talk to us and invited me to interview, which I'm really delighted to do. Let me just explain how the evening will work. Claire and I will have a conversation that you'll witness for about 45 minutes. Mark is going to give me a hard stare if I'm not managing the time properly. And then Claire has brought with her some of her books, which will be on sale when we have a gap between our conversation and the questions that you will generate. I think Claire has signed them or will sign them, and I think there's a special author's price. So I have got my copy that I bought at Greenbelt a few years ago, complete with post-it notes of particularly compelling passages. So I really commend it to you, but more importantly, Claire will commend it to us in the conversation that we're going to have. So Claire, a very warm welcome to Reading and to Café Theo. Thank you so much for coming to be with us. I wondered whether we could start with you introducing yourself a bit, because you've had, or are having, a fascinating career as somebody working in medical ethics and the environment. You've had several brushes with the Church of England that I hope were positive ones. But I wondered whether you could just tell us a little bit about your professional life and the things maybe that have given you joy.
Yes, of course. Well, thank you very much, everybody, for having me. It's a real pleasure to be here. I love the idea, and the manifestation of the idea is every bit as good as I imagined it might be. So thank you for having me. So I read theology. I got into medical ethics as an academic, specialising in the ethics of medical research on humans. And then I went to work for the Church of England as the National Policy Advisor on science, medicine, technology and environmental issues, really focusing on the ethics of it, because that's what, obviously, you might think, the Church would be concerned about. And that involved briefing bishops and speaking to select committees about proposed legislation. But also, in that period, I got very involved in trying to persuade the Church of England to take environmental issues seriously. And this job began in 1999, and in 1999, most people thought, they thought people who were concerned about the environment were weird anyway, but Christian people involved in the environment were really weird. And most people in the church thought, well, what's that got to do with us? Jesus came to people, didn't he? Not the planet. And people outside the church said, well, why would the church have anything sensible to say about this? So we had to turn that round, and to some extent succeeded. Well, to say that now, I don't think many people think it's strange that the church is concerned about environmental issues, that they should have solar panels on their south-facing roofs, for example. It feels perfectly normal and makes sense, but believe me, it didn't then. But it was really moving into that world that made me begin to think of ethics not as moral codes, not as ways of telling people how to behave, so much as ways of perceiving the world. So it became clear to me that we behave towards the planet the way we do because of the way we perceive it. I became a lay canon at St Paul's Cathedral and co-founded an Institute for Ethics there, really focusing on the city, which is where St Paul's Cathedral in London is based. So financial ethics, about which, well, I didn't know anything about finance. So that was quite a struggle. But but it was amazing to use that huge space as a place where we could talk about the massive global issues of the day, bring that conversation under the dome, as it were. And then, I suppose on the back of that, I was invited to set up an institute for ethics in public life at Westminster Abbey. I should say that happened via a couple of years at St Martin in the Fields, which is a great privilege to work amongst the homeless and with that particularly wonderful church. But then off to Westminster Abbey, which of course is very wealthy and respectable. And its neighbours on Parliament Square are politicians, civil servants, the justices of the Supreme Court, the Royal Society, the Metropolitan Police, the National Galleries, all these institutions of public service. And so we created an institute which was a place where these people struggling to run and rule the country could come and reflect on the good they hoped they were still doing, let's put it like that, reconnect with the vocation to public service. It was for people of all faiths and no faith, and I was amazed at how welcome it was and how people have taken up the opportunity to use this reflective space and breathe, step back a bit, think about what they're doing in a non-judgmental space, in a non-campaigning space. While I was there, I was lucky enough to write a doctorate on Julian of Norwich. The opportunity to write the doctorate came up, and actually I wanted it to be on environmental issues, but the person who was going to be one of my supervisors said, "Are you going to use a text?" And I thought I'd like to use a text, and he said, "What's the text?" And without any thought, I said, Julian of Norwich's Revelations of Divine Love. And that's a pretty strange thing to say, because if you think about it, if you're going to go medieval for your environment teaching, you'd go to St. Francis, wouldn't you? Brother Wind and Sister Water. But out she came of my mouth, as it were. And I'm bound to say that I have always loved Julian. I first met her in my dry as dust theology degree at Oxford. It was the term on the mystics was the best term, and she was the best of mystics. And asked more recently why I fell in love with her then, I found myself saying she didn't try to organise God. And so much of the theology that I was reading then, and frankly that still gets written, does try to do that. The church tries to do that. In a way we all try to do that, but organising brings things under control and makes us feel we know what we're dealing with. And of course the one thing you absolutely cannot do, ever succeed in doing, is to organise God. So whatever it is you've organised, it's not God. and she was able to write in this amazing way about these visions that she had that just woke something up in the reader, rather than was an argument with which one could agree or disagree. She kindled something to life. And the doctorate ended up being about how her way of showing what she saw to her readers with the same power that she experienced in seeing the visions herself creates a transformation of selfhood, I argued, that is this transformation that we need in order to learn how to live with the earth without harming it. That is to say, to become porous to what's in front of us instead of putting it out there. We're children of the Enlightenment, and we measure things and we control them and we make nature serve our needs. And this was an entire shift in way of thinking. And my argument was that reading her can have this effect on us, and that is how she can help us with the ecological crisis that we're in now. I defended my doctorate in 2018, and in 2019 I was diagnosed with myeloma, which is a blood cancer, an incurable blood cancer. And Julian moved from being the subject of my academic research to being my companion and friend and guide through 2.5 years of really grueling treatment. And she showed me, it was like having my bluff called actually, what I'd said that she did to us, I then had to let her do to me. in relation to my cancer. And what she did was she showed me how to become porous to it, how to smile at it, how even to love it, so that instead of it being a source of bitterness, it became a source of joy, if you can believe me. Honestly, this is the effect that her writing had on me, or my study of her had on me in relation to my cancer. And so I would deliberately, as I was walking towards the cancer centre, towards the chemotherapy, which is going to give me 24 to 48 hours of hell, because I never controlled the nausea. And certainly when I was going for the stem cell transplant, when they kill all your bone marrow and make you so vulnerable to infection that even your own bacteria is poisonous to you, and you're in isolation, and your gut, all the bacteria in your gut is killed off. So you have this revolting taste in your mouth. You cannot keep anything down, but you have to eat, you have to drink to get your strength up. It is unbelievably vile for a while. Through all of that, I would, well, not when I was really, really ill. When you're really, really ill, honestly, you just lie there and others were praying for me, let's put it like that. I was incapable of anything. Actually, I remember getting quite annoyed with Julian at that point, because when she is at the height of her illness, she has her visions at the height of an illness, she was thinking with all her might how much she loved Jesus, and all I could think was lots of swear words. So I thought, well, all right, Julian, you can do it for me. But it was to open my heart to what was to come, to smile at it. I used to dress up for chemotherapy, put lipstick on, put jewellery on, and of course that cheers everybody else up as well. You're wearing bright colours, and lots of healthcare assistants and nurses said, your attitude is going to make a huge difference to the way you respond to the treatment. But I never ever thought of it as something against which I was battling, ever. I even thought of it sometimes, this is an Ignatian approach, as Jesus himself coming into my body through the cancer. And these contrary thoughts were extraordinarily powerful. I asked for the cancer to transform me. So she had a really powerful effect on me in this 2.5 years of treatment. And I wrote about it, and the letters, I mean, I hadn't intended that the letters should be published, but they were in a book called Miles to Go Before I Sleep, if you fancy. It's not for the faint-hearted, because the whole point of the letters was not to make them, not to tidy them up and make them bearable, but to tell my friends just how bad it all was, as well as all the joys, and lots of Julian. But at the end of the 2.5 years of treatment, I heard a call to tell Julian's story as a homage to her. Now, as I will just say very briefly in a moment of Julian, that we know almost nothing about her. We have this text, amazing text, Revelations of Divine Love, and we know there was an anchoress called Julian living in a cell attached to a church called St. Julian, just about 10 minutes from the Norwich Cathedral, at the end of the 14th and the beginning of the 15th century. We know that from independent sources, because the manuscripts of the text are all late. So we cannot be 100% sure that the anchoress we know existed at the end of the 14th, early 15th century is the author of Revelations of Divine Love. However, in the text, Revelations of Divine Love, the woman, she refers to herself as a woman, speaks about having visions in May 1373. So the dates work. And most scholars are convinced, and in telling her story, I then became convinced, really it is the same person. Or I imagined her as the same person. But it meant that the story was going to be a novel. I could use my creative imagination, and this helped me because I was really telling. Well, let's put it like this: I didn't know where I stopped and Julian started. It's in the first person. It's a fictional autobiography, But the richness of the text is what gave her text, Revelations of Divine Love, was what gave me the inspiration for her tale, as well as knowing that she lived through what was called the pestilence in the 14th century. So that gave some content as well. So she is this extraordinary woman who, in May 1373, at the height of a fever, had 16 visions, and ultimately came to write about them. And they're quite shocking theologically. They're fascinating. They draw you in. They're really ultimately about love as like a huge waterfall that, as Ian Wilson said this, that abolishes ethics. This really tied in with the way I was thinking about ethics. That it doesn't. I mean, we could have rules. We do need rules in some contexts. We do need rules in some contexts. But love and what you will do. That's the quote Augustine of Hippo. And it is the most extraordinary force, and somehow, whereas she wasn't terribly well known before, and her manuscripts disappeared and then reappeared, today more and more people are interested in Julian and what she has to say. It's as if almost as if she was writing for our day, almost. One can't be sure. So the phrase, all shall be well and all shall be well and all manner of things shall be well, is hers. God, of thy goodness, give me thyself, for thou art enough for me, is her. She saw everything that was made the size of a hazelnut in the palm of her hand, and understood that it lasted only because God loved it. So God could never be wroth, because if God were wroth for 1 nanosecond, not a word she used obviously, for 1 nanosecond, what is would fall, because it's held together by God's love. She saw the fall not as sin and disobedience, but an over-eagerness to obey. She saw the crucifixion as God's self-atoning, not humans atoning. Jesus says on the cross, art thou well apaid? Have I suffered enough? If I could suffer more, I would suffer more. I mean, these are really topsy-turvy concepts. She keeps on seeing what Holy Church does not tell her. What's absolutely brilliant about her is she doesn't jettison Holy Church. She doesn't jettison something just because it's apparently contradictory. It's something my father, something my father taught me years ago. He said, if you're faced with if you're offered 2 propositions and they both have merit, but they're contradictory, keep them both in your mind. Don't jettison one just to make your life simpler. Keep them both in your mind, and your mind will grow. Such brilliant advice. And I think Julian does that, which is why it's such an alive text. She hasn't sorted it out. She hasn't worked it out. She's just said, this is what I saw. Isn't it amazing? And no, it doesn't all make sense completely, but it's what I saw. Anyway.
Thank you. What a rich response. Thank you so much. I heard you speaking at Greenbelt, I think shortly after the book had been published. And I bought the book, which is here, and I love the book, and the book gave me palpitations. And so there's a particular scene in the book when Julian of Norwich is going to enter her cell, and you'll describe it much better than I, but the anxiety that grew in me was because she's present and conscious at her own funeral. Most of us, all of us, will be present at our funerals but not conscious in the way that she is. And it was this that made my heart to race. I mean, it's such good writing because I was there imagining myself as Julian and her being walled up alive in this cell where she's to spend the rest of her life. And I wondered whether, would you read it to us? That'd be amazing.
So if I've got it right, the passage is just after there's a Requiem Mass. So an anchorite lives in a cell attached to a church and never leaves it, basically. Lives in one room. Goes in voluntarily, you hope. And so there's a Requiem Mass at which she's present as if she was there in her coffin. And then she's taken down into her cell. Actually, somebody has reconstructed the ritual and made a YouTube film of it. I don't know if it's still there. It's well worth looking at from various sources.
It's 198, 199.
I think it's I've got it. Yeah. Oh, do you want me to read all the mass? No.
Just read the palpitations bit. I said just read the bit that gave me palpitations. It's when she's been sort of carried in and then walled up.
Okay. When the mass ends, with almost no volition of my own, I am taken from my place before the high altar, through the rood screen, to the doorway in the south wall of the church, portal to my anchor hold, my place of prayer and retreat, of loneliness and submission, my last resting place before death, my first grave. The priests who convey me stop at the doorway and release my hands, and at this point I am alone, and alone, by my own deliberate choice, I step down into the room. Dies Irae is chanted. I am in the anchor hold now. The chanting continues, the bell tolls. I turn and kneel at the window into the sanctuary through which I can see the altar and Bishop Henry and the priests, but not the people. Nevermore the people at prayer. I am kneeling, my body completely still and steady, and then panic rises from my belly to my forehead. But it is too late to run. The little doorway is bricked up, one brick upon another, not yet sealed with mortar, that will come later, but sealing me in nevertheless, and my breath is shallow now, my heart beating fast as brick upon brick is placed. Rex tremende majestatis, qui salvandus salvis gratis, salva me fons pietatis. The last bricks are laid. The space where the door was is gone. I am buried. The cantor completes the terrible chant. Pie Jesu Domine, dona eis requiem. Amen. Merciful Lord Jesus, grant me rest. Amen.
It's had the same effect on me.
But then she says she feels at home after that.
Well, this is one of the things I wanted to talk to you about, because you've spoken about your father's advice to hold two things in your mind at once, not to reject either, which is a key move in reconciliation for me, actually. But your novel is full of paradox. So she's walled up in this cell, she's buried alive, but it becomes clear that there is the place of freedom for her. So the moment when you think that you would be, she does have that moment of panic, but she kind of gets over it and she finds freedom in this tiny cell. And there's an irony to me that it's when she's isolated that her voice starts to be heard, and when she's isolated that she feels more connected than ever with the world around her. So can you just speak about some of these amazing paradoxes for us and how those things work, and whether or not, I'm really interested, do those things become true because she's a woman? and it is in isolation that she finds her voice and her connection and her freedom.
Yes, so in the story, I imagine, and I think I'm right, and I think this speaks to women today as much as it would have done then, that she's in this pickle. So something is calling always in her to turn inward, to look within. She has the she marries and she has a child, but then and she finds this really taxing. She's living in a house in the city of Norwich, having grown up just outside in a small holding and loving nature, and she's walled up in this house in the city, and everybody always needs her. Her husband has a wool business, and there are servants, and she's she wrote in English, so we imagine she could keep the accounts, she could write the House of Accounts, and her daughter is pulling at her, and then the pestilence comes again, and they can't leave the house, but Martin, her husband, still keeps going out to his wool factory, and then he comes back and she's brushing him down with sage and being furious with him, but she can't leave the house. Her daughter is getting more and more fractious, it's hot, and she escapes finally just to give herself a bit of space away from all of this, and goes into the woods outside the city, and then it rains, and she just has a moment of freedom, and then she turns to go back to the house, and that's when the pestilence has taken her husband, and shortly thereafter her daughter. And there's that feeling, do we not recognise this, that the minute you just give yourself a break, things start to go wrong. It feels as though it's all your responsibility. If you don't keep the plate spinning, something's going to go wrong, and that's what it feels like to her, although she could not be blamed for it, but she carries the guilt for it. Then she has these extraordinary visions, and there's quite a lot of pressure on her to marry again, not least because this second wave of the pestilence, as a matter of historical fact, took the children and lots of young men. So there was a certain amount of pressure to have more children. But she just desperately doesn't want that. And now she's had these visions, and she knows they're quite dangerous, and she needs the space to reflect on them. And she needs to be left alone. But what options are there? To be a householder again, or to be a nun? In neither case are you free to pursue your own thoughts, and indeed ultimately to write them down. So I hope it then makes a kind of sense that she would choose this life, to take herself into a room of her own. I mean, it seems quite extreme, but maybe it didn't seem so extreme at the time, that she would need to do that in order to have the freedom. This is the paradox, to go somewhere where because no one else can go into the cell, so she really will be left alone. And people do come to her for counsel, which is how she ends up being so connected to the world, because people come to her cell, and her fame grows, and more people come. So she knows what's going on, but she never moves. But she can also draw her curtain across the window and be left alone, in peace, to reflect on these visions, and ultimately, as I say, to write them down with a degree of safety. No one's looking over her shoulder. And at this time, towards the end of the 14th century, there's a huge amount of concern within the church about lollardy, which is proto-Protestantism. Wycliffe had translated the Bible into English. There were more and more people saying, we don't need these priests, we don't need Latin, we don't need the church. And so she was accused of that. And there's some evidence in her text that she might indeed have been one, although I don't think she was, because she also is so quick to defend Holy Church and to say we should obey Holy Church. So yes, she goes into an interior place, and that is where she finds this enormous space in which to write massive universal things, and indeed the world comes to her, and she knows more about the world being there than she might have done had she gone back to being a householder and just been busy with the householdery things, and had to focus only on that, which is what she did in her first in her marriage.
And maybe these days we're so externally referenced all the time, or often, you know, that's the way in which society draws us. We get our validation by the number of likes on our social media, or you know, we're kind of judging ourselves against the measures of the world. And this is what makes her story for me so fascinating, that she's privileging the interior life over everything that's external. And I mean, have you learned lessons from her yourself? I'm sure you have. What are they?
Oh yes, absolutely. And let me say that the challenge of writing a novel, which you want to be a page turner, you want people to be gripped by the story about somebody who never goes anywhere. How do you do it? Well, anybody who has tried to cultivate an interior life, practice contemplation, pray, will know this is not a walk in the park. And I was quite influenced. I go to the community of the Resurrection in Murfield, a community of Anglican monks, for my retreats, they're silent retreats. And I've done the Ignatian exercises, so I have worked quite hard at all of this myself. And Brother George there told me that a journalist, someone had asked him about being a monk and saying, wasn't it boring? Because you do the same things day after day after day with the same people. And George said, you know that film, The African Queen? And you know the one with, forgotten who African Queen. He said, well, it's like that, only worse. It's more dramatic. And it's true, this inner journey is it's so dramatic. There's so much going on inside ourselves. And yes, it absolutely is counter to a contemporary anxiety that we only know who we are by what's around us. And I don't know about you, but I find that very disconcerting and discombobulating. And I have to keep coming back to something that's deep within me. Otherwise I'm pulled hither and yon. And it's draining. And so she really helped me to learn how to contemplate, how to find within me. And it's not, there's nothing separated or small about it. It's, you go within and you find a universe in there. And nobody's excluded. You're porous, it makes you porous because there's a kind of vulnerability that comes with this internal journey. Because you have to become honest with yourself, honest with what you're seeing. I use this with the public servants, the politicians, and that's quite hard when you're so busy and so outward, particularly MPs, but all these people in public life, all outward focused for very good reasons, for public service. So to take the time to look within can be terrifying. And somebody said, I don't want to look. God knows what's in there. It takes courage.
You said a little earlier that sometimes you didn't know where Julian's voice ended and your own began. And I just wanted to explore a bit senses in which it's not only her fictional biography, but inevitably you kind of write yourself into the text. And I was interested in a couple of things. I think you were writing this during the COVID pandemic, were you? And really interested in how that informs some of the writing, not only about not the plague, what was it called? The pestilence, but also about the isolation and how those things do you think have informed the way you write?
Definitely. Yes, so the last year of my treatment was the first year of the pandemic, and then the book was written the following year. So yes, we were very much still going through it. And certainly the feeling, so this is in the book, when the pestilence first turns up and nobody knows where it's from, how it's transmitted, what you do about it when you get it. And do you remember that feeling at the beginning of the pandemic? And I suppose I was particularly acutely feeling it because I was having chemotherapy. I'd come out of a stem cell transplant, and my husband also. We were both in the vulnerable. We were getting these peppy texts from Matthew Hancock, and we couldn't go to shops, and we couldn't go. But I had to travel each week to have my chemotherapy on a thankfully empty train, but I didn't know whether to touch the table. I didn't dare get anywhere near anybody. We just didn't know. And so that sense of fear of the unknown, fear of this thing that was around us, very much wrote itself into the text. And I thought, well, you know what, what's so different between that century and this? And yes, the isolation, so which I obviously had myself personally because of the stem cell transplant, but then, I don't know, I just felt less lonely once the pandemic began and everybody was wearing masks and everybody was isolating. I thought, I'm not alone, funny word, anymore. And in fact, she became a bit of a heroine of the pandemic for that reason, that people were writing blogs about her, about how to be alone fruitfully. Yeah, so many read acrosses, and also grief. And I have her pondering that the anger that comes out of the accusations of heresy was unacknowledged grief, in fact. Grief turns to fear, turns to anger. And I saw that around me in our own time as well. Possibly it's still there, isn't it? Let's just know that. We are still so angry. Well, does some of that come out of unacknowledged grief from the pandemic? Maybe. And fear about climate change. We're angry. We're not addressing it. And part of her role, she felt, was to receive that and just... Do you know this, when you can receive something that's so bitter and horrible and poisonous, and you can just let the poison go? Do you know, I think it's a kind of praying. So there's anger and bitterness and nastiness, and you can just not push it away, receive it, but like filtering or letting go of the poison, releasing the poison. I think we can do this, not if we're angry.
I know that Mark is going to hit me over the head shortly, so I would just love to ask, this amazing novel that you've written, giving voice again to a woman, introducing her to new generations, do you have other such novels planned? When can we read them, and who are they about?
Well, funny you should say that. So on the back of the experience of writing I, Julian, I did feel a very strong call to give more of myself to writing. I felt this was something that I could do that perhaps might help. And I'd done 10 years of this institute at Westminster Abbey, so I left, and I'm now a full-time writer. And what happened after Julian was finished was that I heard another call. I don't hear calls, right? And I completely ignored it, but it didn't go away. And it was as if Jesus had said to me, "Can you tell my story like you told her story?" So I thought, yeah, I don't have calls, so I don't know. No, that's not. But it wasn't. It was here. And it didn't go away. So I thought, oh, well, why not try, actually? Why not try? So I began to write in the first person, Jesus as a woman. And honestly, it didn't work. It wasn't coming. It felt very artificial. But what ended up being written was... the book's called My Name is Joanna, and the main narrator is the beloved disciple, who is a woman, which is a bit Da Vinci Code. If you think of Leonardo da Vinci's Last Supper and the one who's lying on his breast. But as a matter of fact, the beloved disciple has always been depicted without a beard. If you look at any pictures of him lying in Jesus' lap, or no beard. So in my story, it's Joanna masquerading as John, as one of the disciples. So you can have an account of this extraordinary time of Jesus' ministry from one of the witnesses, but telling the story as a woman. So it's a woman's reflection on the transfiguration and walking on water and the teaching and so forth. The figure of Jesus is disabled. He has a withered right arm and a stammer, because I thought, I don't want to change the words. The words are magnificent, but we need to hear them, and they shoot over our heads because we're so... Even people who are not religious, love thy neighbour, heard it before. We don't really hear what an extraordinary thing it is to say. Pray for your enemies. What an extraordinary thing to say, particularly today. So with a stammer, you know, somebody's... and you are waiting to hear what's going to come out of their mouth. And the withered right arm, so I thought, what's transformative about the encounter with Jesus? Well, there has to be some opening of the heart. And our hearts open with compassion when we're faced with disability. That might be a modern thing, but I put it into the first century. So, but then in the story, the arm then becomes the means of the miracles. So he has to lift his right arm with his left arm, and he places it against the neck of the flagons of water, and the water becomes wine. Or he touches the person with the withered arm, and that's how the healing happens. So that's a thing about the power of disability and the power of humanity. And the voice of Jesus did emerge. Also, Jesus is non-binary, which personally I find entirely uncontroversial, because if God is going to become human, surely God is going to become male and female. Surely. What's odd about that? Anyway, the publishers said it's commercially risky, so that book is not yet within a contract. So you may have to wait a few years to hear that. But now I'm right. So what I'm finding is there's a call to tell about the sacred feminine, and the story I'm writing now, which the publishers are much more interested in, is the story of a 6th century Frankish princess called Bertha, who was betrothed to the King of Kent, and she agreed to marry him only on condition that she could practice her faith, because Kent was pagan. After the Romans left, Kent became pagan. He agreed and built her a church, and that is where St. Augustine of Canterbury set up shop when he arrived at St. Martin's Church just outside Canterbury. It's still there, it's still worshipped, and you can see the Roman bricks. And I thought, bugger me, we've all heard of St. Augustine of Canterbury, but who has heard of Bertha? But arguably, she's the reason that the south of England was converted, because Augustine would have got nowhere. Ethelbert wouldn't have given him any. Actually, he met him on the Isle of Thanet. He was a bit wary of him. Wouldn't meet him inside, but the mission unfolded. So now I'm telling her story, and then there's a story of her daughter, Ethelberga, who married the King of Northumbria on condition not only that she could practice her faith, but that he converted too. When he died, she came down and founded a mixed monastery in Lyminge. Her great niece, Earnswith, whose relics were recently confirmed as being hers, founded a mixed monastery in Folkestone. So all through the end of the 6th, 7th century, there's this very strong female leadership strand, which then gets smothered, and we are left with a church that is, and it doesn't want to be, horribly masculine and structured and organised and hierarchical. And so I'm just trying to bring out a story, and of course it's my creative imagination. Nothing is written down about this. Nothing. Almost nothing. There's one line about Bertha in Bede, and a letter from the Pope telling her why hasn't she converted her husband yet. So anyway, yeah, so that's what I'm working on now.
I mean, I now have 54 things that I want to say to you, including, there seems to be a really interesting link to me between the non-binary Jesus that you write about and Julian of Norwich, who wants to keep talking about the divine as mother. She uses a lot of feminine imagery for God, and so there seems to be an interesting connection. And I'm also so taken by the stammer, and how that makes the familiar unfamiliar
Yes.
in ways that open up our curiosity again. So can we all petition the publisher to say we really want to read this, please?
Please do, it's Hodder. I'll give you the email.
Yeah, I mean, I'm up for it. We'll have a petition. I'll create it in the break.
Yeah, I think they're a bit scared. It's a bit, you know, if you're a good Christian, it's a bit scary.
Yeah.
I don't know.
And I'm also so interested in the legacy issues of the fact that we've stopped telling the story of women who found the church in the British Isles, and we're still living with that, I think, in the Church of England and in other denominations in this country. You know, even though here I am, a woman who's a bishop, we still have so far to travel.
Yes.
And so telling these foundational stories, I think, is a real gift to us. So thank you so much.
And the extent to which you have to fit into what is essentially a male structure in order to be a bishop will be an example of how hard it has become.
It really very much so, and you know, being determined to be myself, which means to be a woman. You know, my work in the prison service, I worked in men's prisons, and the kind of the pressure to become masculine in the way that I ran prisons, which I absolutely resisted, because I believe that we're called as ourselves, and that was a calling too. So I think that we have a break for people to buy this amazing book and to think about the questions that you would like to ask Claire, because I shouldn't have all the fun, should I? So please think about the things that you would like to ask Claire. We'll have sort of 10 minutes, I think. So reconvene at Harper State. If you'd like to buy a book, I recommend they're on the bar. Thank you so much, Claire.
They cost £7.
They cost £7. It's a bargain, buy two. Yeah.